Hi, it's Cailey from Salisbury Greenhouse Design. I'm here again with our aquatic expert, Mark.
Hey.
Today we're going to be talking about ponds. Mark, I see you brought some plants in. Do you want to tell me about some of these?
Sure. So I brought 3 different types of plants for this video. The first is going to be marginal plants. So marginal plants are planted around the margin of the pond. That's why they're called marginal. So basically, they provide the growth, the height, the flower, and everything like that. The real interest of the pond is going to be what's planted around the margins. So there are tons of different varieties that you can put along. Even plants that just like wet soil. They don't necessarily have to be pond plants per se, but they really add the interest to your pond that you need. The margin of the pond is going to be just along the outside of the water. So marginal plants usually refer to the soil that's around the bank of your pond or about 6 inches deep into your pond, right? So a very shallow area of your pond is where you're going to want to plant your marginal plants.
So what about some of these other ones here?
Okay, so I've got lilies here, which are what's called a submerged plant. Now they're really interesting because their roots go to the bottom of the pond and their paths grow up to the surface of the pond and they produce a nice big flower. So they're really good for providing cover for fish, a lot of interest and everything like that. Like you need to have some vegetation inside of the pond as well. And that also goes for your floating plants. So like the lilies, where the lilies pads sit on the surface of the pond, we also have some floating varieties. The floating varieties also sit on the top of the pond. So they don't have to have any soil or anything like that. The roots dangle into the water and that's where they get their nutrients from.
So you did mention giving a little bit of shade for fish. If some of my clients do have fish within their ponds, is there something that they need to know about that? How much shade to how much sun they can have their pond in?
Okay, so for fish in your pond, you need to have a couple of things. As I said before with the lily pads, they provide shade. You need to have a nice surface shade on the top of the pond so that you don't have any direct sunlight hitting those fish, so they don't get too hot. So basically, when you have those pads on top of the surface, they can kind of hide under them, get a little bit of shade, get a little bit of indirect sunlight, and not overheat. The other thing that you need to know with fish is you need to have something called oxygenating plants. Now, oxygenating plants are another submerged variety of plant that sit in the water, and most of their foliage exists within the water. So basically what happens is they get the sunlight, they take the CO2 from inside the water, and they photosynthesize underneath the water, and they release little oxygen bubbles. And the oxygen bubbles keep the fish happy and healthy.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. That gave us some great information about ponds.
Yeah, you're welcome.